It's an incredible honor for the First Lady and I to welcome to Virginia perhaps the most acclaimed international wine critic that there is today, Stephen Spurrier.
Wow. Governor MacDonald, First Lady, thank you, First Lady MacDonald, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I'm going to have to read this. I can't ad-lib it like the governor. First, I should say how very much I appreciate being here at the Inaugural Virginia Wine Summit. I'd particularly like to thank the governor and his wife for having invited my wife and me to this event, and for having hosted us at the splendid reception last night at the governor's mansion. I would also like to thank Todd Haymore, Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, and Annette Boyd, Director of the Virginia Wine Board Marketing Office, for all their efforts in planning and organizing this trip. Deep thanks also to the owners of the wineries who have welcomed us over the past 2 days and who will welcome us over the next 2 days. It is fair to say that I've never had a more in-depth immersion in a wine region over such a short period of time. And if I were a blogger, which I'm not, pages and pages of notes would already be on the internet with pages and pages to follow. As it is, I should just try and remember everything and record it through my regular column in Decanter and wave the flag for Virginia wines even more energetically than I have in the past. Flag waving for the Virginia wine industry is very easy for me. From my very first visit to the state about a dozen years ago, while playing my assumed role as understudy to the great Michael Broadbent, whose son is here tonight. I was accustomed to receiving telephone calls during the 1990s along the lines of, "Stephen, I've been invited to such and such a region to give some tastings, and I find I can't go, and I've recommended you." Such calls got me my first visit to Chile, to a wine conference in Helsinki, Finland, to charity dinners in Nashville, Tennessee, and at that time to an as yet hardly known Virginia. Time passed, and then about 5 years ago, Wines of Virginia gave their first London tasting at Vinopolis, City of Wine, followed by their continuing presence at the London Wine Trade Fair each May. But I'll come back to those tastings in a moment. Suffice it to say that in November last year, when, as president of the Circle of Wine Writers, I was informed that the Italian embassy had backed out at short notice, citing budget problems, from hosting our annual Christmas party, my question, "What happens now?" was immediately answered by, "Don't worry, the Virginia Wine Board has agreed to host it." And so it was, in the presence of Todd Haymore, Annette Boyd, and a dozen wineries. The Circle of Wine Writers was magisterially received in one of the most historic buildings in London's law courts for an evening as charming as it was memorable. Such generosity I have found repeated over and over again in the few days that I've been here. I've been given the honor of saying a few words about the Virginia wine industry at this inaugural wine summit, and apart from a few facts comparing Virginia to the other major wine-producing states in the Union, the rest of what I say will be personal impressions of the current state of the industry and a few possibilities for the future, based partly on my experiences of other countries' wines over almost 50 years working in wine, but more on my own feelings as a wine lover. I probably know less about Virginia wine than any of you here in this room, therefore this speech will be relatively brief. But as I probably have more experience in wine around the world than any of you here in this room, there will be a lot of time for questions. What I'm going to say will be divided into 4 parts. 1, the major regions in the USA, 2, wine grapes and stars in Virginia, 3, wine and the media, and 4, wine and tourism. So let us look at Virginia today compared to California, Oregon, Washington State, and New York. The governor has referred to the fact that Virginia is now the 5th largest wine-producing state in the country. But a few facts. California, 543,000 acres, 3,540 wineries, 61% share of the market, rank in U.S. grape production first. No surprise. Washington State, 43,850 acres, 739 wineries, rank in U.S. grape production second. Oregon, 20,400 acres, 870 wineries, rank in U.S. grape production third. New York State, 370,000 acres, 303 wineries, but 80% of the wines of Vitis Lambrusco Concord grapes, and only 25% of the grapes are used for wine production. Virginia, just over 3,000 acres, 220 wineries, 221 perhaps, thanks to Gene. 220 wineries, rank in U.S. wine grape production fifth. So here you are, fifth. So Virginia is now the fifth largest of the U.S. wine-producing states, and while the small current acreage on the vines is not going to surpass even that of New York anytime soon, Virginia is a national contender. The important thing to note is that the three largest wine-producing states are all on the West Coast. And while the wines produced in California, Oregon, and Washington do not resemble each other to any great extent, there is a certain overlap due to the hot, dry climate. Virginia on the East Coast with a cooler and more humid climate makes quite different wines. This, in my view, is a strength rather than a weakness, and it should be built upon. Your wines go with food. I'll talk a bit more about the style of wines. There are certainly wines which I particularly like, and there are wines which, as a wine drinker, they call for the second glass. That's most important. So, grapes and styles. A quick look at the planting in terms of acres of the principal grape varieties from 2010 to 2011 shows certain trends. Chardonnay, 443 acres 2010 down to 362. That to me is surprising because Chardonnay is a world-known grape variety, and in my view, Virginia makes very good Chardonnay in the lemony, rather restrained style. However, I attended the very good Virginia, of course, that's in my mind, Viognier comparison this morning, and we had a very interactive discussion for 45 minutes on Viognier. And I don't think you can discuss Chardonnay for more than about 10 minutes. So maybe that's why the Chardonnay production is dropping a bit. Merlot, 316 acres down to 301. Well, okay. Cabernet Franc, 282 acres up to 322. Well, that's very, very strong, and it was seen in the tasting this morning. The Cabernet Franc is one of the, if not the, red grape variety for Virginia. Cabernet Sauvignon, 232 acres up to 260. I think Cabernet Sauvignon for this state is better in a blend than 100% varietal, but it's very, very important. Viognier, 185 acres up to 201. Well, Viognier we've all talked about, and I think this is one of the great calling cards, if not the great calling card of Virginia in terms of white wine. Petit Verdot, 121 up to 146. That Petit Verdot showed very strongly this morning. That, I think, is almost a unique calling card for Virginia because very few other wine regions in the world make 100% Petit Verdot. Pinot Gris, 64 to 79. I'm very keen on Pinot Gris. Luca calls it Pinot Grigio and makes a lighter style wine. I prefer the Pinot Gris style, and I think that's the style. The Alsatian style is what you should be going for. Sorry, Luca. Riesling, 45 to 46. It's fine. Okay. Sauvignon Blanc, 28 to 35. Okay, Sauvignon Blanc is a very nice, elegant, crisp wine, but a lot of other people make it, so you don't have to do that. Tannat, very surprising, red grape from southwest France, 20 to 30. Pinot Noir, 32 to 23. That's very significant. This county is not made for Pinot Noir. Syrah, 27 to 26, and I will be surprised if there's any Syrah in this state in the next 5 years. Of the hybrids, Vidal Blanc, 118 to 160, very good for sweet wines, very good in Niagara as well. Chambourcin, planted by the lady governor, 128 to 134, very dark-colored wine, so very good in blends. And then I'd add the oddities, Vermentino, Nebbiolo, all those little things that people are not experimenting with. The Nebbiolo this morning was outstanding, and Barbersville have made a speciality of that. So, but basically, it shows a certain pattern. So from those facts, it can be deduced that Virginia is not warm enough for Syrah, and it's too warm and too humid to the susceptible to rot Pinot Noir. What is interesting to me is the presence of two grapes from southwest France, Petit Mansingh, which I hadn't mentioned in that breakdown, for whites and Tannat for the reds, the latter probably more as a blender to give extra weight to the Cabernet Merlot blends. Before I tell you some of the styles that I personally appreciate, I would like to quote from my old friend John Salvi, Masters of Wine, who was here about a couple of weeks ago, who has been in the wine trade almost exclusively based in Bordeaux for 54 years. Anyway, this is what John said. In my mind, Virginia has overtaken New York State for quality. The Viognier is often superb, crisp, fresh, fruited, and vital with lots of acidity. Cabernet Franc is the finest grape, and it loves the deep clay soil and produces balanced, well-fruited, well-structured wines of world-class quality for the best of them. Pinot Noir is another winner, and it often ripens fully to be picked before the Cabernet. It is a full-flavored, powerfully structured, long, complete, generous wine. These three are the best. It's too hot for Pinot Noir. There's very little Sauvignon Blanc so far, and the Chardonnays are often too buttery and too heavy. From what I have tasted, I disagree with John about this. From my own tastings, I was lucky enough to receive the 12 bottles of wine which were selected for the Governor's Cup this year, and completely concur with that the award went to Glen Manor Vineyards for their 2009 Hodder Hill Bordeaux blend. My other favorites from this high-quality selection were the Jefferson Vineyards 2010 Cabernet Franc, the King Family Vineyards 2008 Meritage Blend, Keswick Vineyards 2009 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, Veritas Winery 2010 Vintners Reserve for the reds, and the very interesting Tarara Winery 2010 Honoli from 40% Viognier, 40% Petit Mansingh, and 20% Roussanne. That's a blend which no one in France would even consider. The idea of blending Viognier with Petit Mansingh is completely out of the question. My tastings at the London Wine Trade Fair showed an admiration for the following: Barbersville 2010 Viognier, Boxwood 2010 Topiary with 61% Cabernet Franc and 39% Merlot, Bro Vineyards 2007 Cabernet Franc Reserve, King Family Vineyards 2010 Viognier, Veritas Vineyard and Winery 2010 Petit Verdot, Williamsburg Winery 2009 Adagio with 69% Petit Verdot, and especially the Williamsburg 2010 Gabriel Archer Reserve, their Bordeaux blend, and also their 2007 Virginia Trianon with 80% Cabernet Franc. And finally, in disagreement with my friend John Salvi, Williamsburg 2010 Vintage Reserve Chardonnay. All those wines are fantastic, and I think at Breakfast with Champions this morning we saw many more fantastic wines. This leads me to the conclusion that the overall production is good now, and judging by these recent vintages will get even better in the future. It is very important, in my view, that the wines made remain recognizably Virginian. Every wine country or region has its own image, sunny California and so on. Perhaps the Virginia image is still being refined, but I often describe wines by what they are not. And Virginia wines are certainly not flashy and brash. And you must stay away from that. So wine, I think the focus on Viognier that we've done, Chardonnay, I think in a fresher style, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Bordeaux blends, fantastic. And the oddities, which Nebbiolo, Petit Mansingh, Pinot Gris, and probably a sparkling wine. Okay, wine in the media. In this day and age, something which is not communicated about it does not exist. Communication is all, and while there are all sorts of media and all sorts of communication, the way to communicate what wines are about is to have them tasted. This is why it was an extremely good and very brave move by the Virginia wine producers to hold a tasting at London's Vinopolis City of Wine about 5 years ago. At the time I attended in mid-morning, turnout was not great, because Virginia was not really, in London we have tastings every day, so Virginia was not a great calling card, but of high quality. Hugh Johnson was there, Jancis Robinson, Oz Clarke, Andrew Jefford, to name just four. We were amazed by what we tasted, particularly the Viogniers, previously almost exclusive to the Rhone Valley and warmer climates, and the Cabernet Franc. And we kept on rushing about the room, Jancis, try that. Hugh, you must taste that. And so very swiftly there were articles in the press, and then 4 years ago, mainly at the instigation of Christopher Parker, with the support of the Governor's Office, the Virginia wine producers took a stand at the London Wine Trade Fair and have done so each year since. Such exposure is expensive, but it is vitally important, and I think that today is another very important step in the communication direction. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So here we all are talking about Virginia wine. Wine and tourism. One could say that wine tourism was invented in the Napa Valley by Robert Mondavi, and certainly California has shown the lead, which has been copied all over the world. You might think that France, with its great chateau and historic domains, would have been good at wine tourism, but only in recent years has this been so, and only up to a point. The chateau doors were firmly closed in Bordeaux until the great Alexis de Chine, of Russian-American origin, opened Chateau Prairie de Chine in Margaux to the public in the early 1970s. Alexis was a salesman, and he wanted people to come and taste what he had to sell and maybe buy a couple of his books at the same time. His fellow chateaux took a very, very long time to follow suit, and even today, only a handful of them are open to visits without appointments, and the idea of a tasting room is still rare. In Burgundy, the Loire and the Rhone, it was the smaller estates who couldn't sell their wine, which hung out a sign saying Vente Directe, direct sales, while the bigger estates were firmly closed and still are. French wine has been badly served by its government, in great contrast to the governor. And there has been no measure more damaging, in my view, than a law passed called La Loi Evin, a law named after the Minister of Health under the socialist government in the mid-80s, who decided, on the advice of a mass of prohibitionist doctors, to ally wine with alcohol, and therefore considering its consumption harmful, thus forbidding the promotion of wine as a product to be enjoyed in any form. Producers can advertise its existence, but they can't talk about it, as that might encourage people to drink it. When the party of the right got back in a dozen years ago, it was thought that this stupid law would be abolished, but President Chirac was a beer drinker, and he wasn't interested in his country's vineyards. Worse still, President Sarkozy was a teetotaler, and the prohibitionists became even stronger under his influence. President Hollande now has more pressing problems, so wine tourism in France, while growing slowly through the local efforts, is very much on the back burner. Not so here in Virginia, where Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry Todd Haymore states that the Virginia wine industry is one of the fastest growing segments of Virginia's diverse agricultural industry. Thanks to the McDonnell administration, Virginia is receiving national and international attention for its wines, and wine tourism, strongly promoted by Governor McDonnell's initiatives, is playing a very valuable role. California is, of course, far ahead on this front, but Oregon and Washington State are not. And wine tourism is one of the reasons why Virginia wine is being talked about more and more. Wine tourism is one of the few win-win situations in the wine industry. Every person who buys a wine from the cellar door becomes an ambassador for that winery. That's a very strong point. I'd now like to sum up very briefly. To sum up, I'll quote my friend Warren Winiarski of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars in Napa, who said that for him, wine is the 3 Gs: the ground, the grape, and the guy or gal. For me, it is the 3 Ps: the place, the product, and the people. Before coming here, I already knew that Virginia could stand tall for the product. But just in 3 days, I now know that the place and the people fit perfectly into the equation, and that Virginia stands tall on all 3 Ps, and which I'll add a 4th, which is very positive, and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
Stephen, thank you so much for those very, very generous and kind remarks. We greatly appreciate it. I know everyone in the room enjoyed that as well, and hope as much as I did. Stephen has also said he's going to take a few question and answers from the audience, and I'm sure that there are a number of questions out there that are ready to be posed. We do have a little bit of limited time space, so I would encourage you right away, as I move forward with a wireless microphone, to raise your hand. Christopher Parker, you're first up.
Stephen, since 2007, when you first tasted the wines at the exposition there, what would you say is the most significant change that you've seen in Virginia wine production over the last 5-6 years?
I would say the wines are more defined. Each individual grape variety is more defined in its expression. The wineries seem to have more confidence, which could either come from experience or just realizing which way they want to go with their vineyards and their winemaking. There's more definition. I don't really like the word structure, because structure always means it's a bigger wine. But there's more precision. And precision doesn't exclude fruit. You can have wonderful fruit and precision. So I'd say more definition and precision, which is very positive.
Stephen, Neil Williamson with the Virginia Wine of the Month Club. You've had the experiences of the world. Virginia is a growing wine industry. Where would you put us in terms of comparison as we compare wines with our industry and other industries at different points in their growth?
I think the question is sort of answered that you already have more demand than supply. You're a very small industry. I mean, 3,000 acres. Luca just told me that the Zonin family who own Barbersville have double the acreage in Italy than you have in Virginia. So you're a niche market. And I think concentrate on your home market, concentrate on Washington, New York, maybe Canada, a little bit in the UK. Concentrate wherever people want to buy your wines, China perhaps. But concentrate on making the wines that you want to make, and it'll happen.
Mr. Spurrier, I'm Patrick Evans-Hilton from Virginia Wine Lover magazine. Where do you think Virginia's judgment of Paris will be and when? And the reason I ask is we're very happy now, obviously, with a lot of the accolades we've done, a lot of the things that the Governor and First Lady has done, and Secretary Keynote and Annette Boyd. So we're in a happy place now. We also, maybe wonder, would that judgment come against France or would it come against California? And then would the judgment maybe be against ourselves, since we're still a relatively new wine region? Many people perhaps remember some of the wines from 30 years ago that was probably better for stripping paint off the side of a barn than who are winning the awards that the wines have taken that leap and bounds today. So where and when do you think our judgment may come?
Well, I think you had a very good judgment this morning. I wouldn't go too much on to try and hit the international market and try and beat all the other icon wines out there. The purpose of a blind tasting, which I did in 1976, and exactly that purpose, the same purpose we have in the Decanter World Wine Awards, and this year we had over 14,000 entries, is to recognize and reward quality. That's all it's about. Now, if you have unknown wines, one of the only ways to get recognized is to go up against the benchmarks. And this is what the Judgment of Paris did, this is what we did this morning, and this is what will continue to be done. But I wouldn't try and gain muscle. You don't need to be the Charles Atlas weightlifter to sort of go up against other wines around the world. The Judgment of Paris, which you refer to, I think will happen with people talking to each other and recognize that Virginia wines are really very good indeed, and they're the kind of wines they want to drink.
Thank you, Stephen. Chris Pearman, the winemaker.
Yeah.
Around the world, there's regional identification, and Virginia's trying to struggle. I think we're finding our own regional identification. Do you find we found that yet? In that California and France, Virginia seems to be stylistically between those two places. But we're trying to find a tighter one through our identification process and great wine.
I think Virginia is, I'm running about the state, driving everywhere. I don't even have the slightest idea of the regionality of the different climates, microclimates and all that. But what I do have an idea of is each wine I taste is Virginian. And I think that's what you have to, that's the base, that's what you have to keep a hold of. And then I know that the Monticello AVA is huge, and sort of certain people have said it's far too big to be an AVA, it doesn't give us any specific regionality. But the Côte de Beaune is huge, and the Côte d'Or you have Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune. But within the Côte de Beaune, you have Beaune, Volnay, Pommard, Chassagne-Montrachet, you have the whole lot. So the regionality will come. The specific regionality that you're looking for will come. But it's important to keep the Virginia regionality on top.
Hi, Jennifer Knowles from the Inaugural Washington. I feel like the broad-based stretch of AVAs in Virginia, no one really knows them. And so it almost is a situation where you don't see them on labels. You see Monticello now, but not much of anything else. And with the definition, almost like they did in Sonoma with the Russian River, that was a true climactic AVA versus governmental AVA. Do you think that having the ability to size down things and have talking points for regions, somewhat like you just said, is going to eventually give more strength and more notoriety versus just Virginia?
I think it's very good to have as informational background. It's very good to show that there's climatic differences and soil differences. I personally don't think it's very important, because if you look at Chile, Chile invents a new valley every 2 months, and we can't keep up. There are fewer letters in the alphabet than there are now valleys in Chile, and so basically, what it boils down to is the grape variety, the producer, whether it's Errázuriz or whomever, and then the single vineyard. So it's regionality by vineyard, variety, producer. I think AVAs are a nice thing to have. I wouldn't rely on them. That's right.
Hi, Annette Boyd with the Virginia Wine Marketing Office. I am the spokesperson for Virginia Wines, and people are always asking me, okay, what would you compare Virginia to? Knowing that Virginia wants to be unique to our own sense of place. But people always ask me, if you had to pick a region that you saw a lot of similarities just in their growth and their size, and they're struggling to become known, is there a region that you would say is similar?
No, I don't think so. Maybe Portugal. Bartholomew Broadbent can talk to you about Portugal. Portugal has marvelous wine. It's known for its port, but basically the Portuguese red and white wines are sensational, but no one really talks about them. So Portugal is struggling. You're not struggling. You've got more demand than supply. I don't think you can possibly, or I can't possibly compare Virginia to any other wine region or wine country in the world, because it's a different country. In terms of an emerging wine region, you're emerging, but you're emerging with a strong wind behind you, because you're using well-known grape varieties, and you have very good wineries, you have people who are investing money and time to make the best wine they can. So you're not derailed by the habits of the past. That's most important. You can learn from other people's mistakes.
Bartholomew Broadbent. So, from your trip here, obviously Washington, Oregon, and California have a lot more wine, a lot more wineries, and they make a very West Coast style wine. And I think you've just said today that New York is being eclipsed in quality, if not volume, in quality by Virginia. But in terms of a European palate and an international respect for wine, do you think Virginia is making wine which is more internationally acceptable and recognized as high quality than perhaps Washington, Oregon, and California?
The short answer is yes. I don't like international style. I don't like the phrase international style, because that means it's trying to please everybody at the same time, and you can't. I think it's absolutely certain that the wines made in Virginia are more European in style. And the European wines have been around a long time, and they've proved their worth. So, and Washington and Oregon, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, are now niche areas. There's not much. It's talked about, but it's not bought. And I think you're coming in sort of under the radar. You've got your own radar. And also it's very important to keep the pricing not too expensive. But I think Virginia is creating its own niche in a very positive way. and doesn't need to beat too many drums, because the drums are actually going to be beaten for you by people drinking the wine and enjoying them.
I'm Jason Cesaro, Barbersville Vineyards. So just like people live in D.C. but never seem to go to the monuments, we're still hovering around the 5–6% mark of wines consumed in Virginia that are from Virginia. Have you got any tips on how we can get the locals to start seeing the grapes in their own backyards as their first choice? They're going local with cheeses and meats, but they're still bringing in wines from elsewhere.
Use the governor's influence to ban imports of any wines outside Virginia.
More than a question, I have a testimony for you and for everybody that unfortunately you didn't have a chance to taste more wines. Yeah. We have a lot of producers, we have a lot of different styles, and so I hope that in our relationship, continuing, you will be able to taste more of them and more vintages.
That's my hope too. Thank you.